today. My name is Catherine Ennis. I'm the HDR Industry Engagement and Placements Manager, and I'm joined here today with Sally Purcell, HDR Professional Skills Manager, and we're also delighted to be joined today as well with Dr. Brenton Hamdorf from the Faculty of Medicine, Health and Human Sciences, and who's going to speak to us about his role as a professional staff member in that faculty. As we said previously, this particular series of webinars is focusing on staff that have a PhD who may be working in areas that are not strictly research orientated, to give our PhD candidates an opportunity, and HDR generally speaking, an opportunity to understand what kind of jobs are out there when you have your PhD, if research in an academic institute is not strictly where you think you might end up, but an opportunity to see what roles candidates that with a PhD have done, to understand where you might be able to see yourself in the future. So what I'll do is I'll do an acknowledgement of country, and then we'll hand over to Brenton. So I acknowledge the traditional custodians of the Quarry University land, the Watamatagal clan of the Darug Nation, whose cultures and customs have nurtured and continue to nurture this land since the dream time. We pay our respects to elders past, present and future. So with that, Brenton, would you like to introduce yourself? I know you have a few slides there as well, but you can take it away from here.
Thank you, Catherine and Sally, for the invitation to speak today, and hopefully it is of some use to some people. It's always interesting to talk about yourself and you know, discover that it's not always a straightforward path to where you end up at the end of the day. I'm not sure where everyone is from who's joined on here, whether they're from, you know, across the university in different disciplines or particularly in technical areas. But I don't think it matters. I think, you know, there's opportunities that arise from having done a PhD regardless of what area you study in, and the things you learn through having done a PhD are actually far more broadly applicable than just continued research or an academic career. So hopefully you'll see a few of those things. Now I'll flick over to my little brief presentation and start talking a little bit more about that and the things I've got. So let me just share my screen here. I chose not to use a standard university document. My background, so I have a science degree, in a dual degree in microbiology and biochemistry, honours in molecular biology, a PhD in biochemistry. Got bored with science, ended up doing an MBA, and in between time I've done a few other little bits and pieces of short courses of things as well, just to keep myself entertained. At the moment I work in the Faculty of Medicine, Director of Academic and Research Partnerships, a long title which basically means find money. The purpose really is to access resources for research that are generally difficult to access by other means. So traditionally you will apply for research grants of various types, and you will repeatedly do so until you are successful. Engaging with other partner organisations, whether they're research organisations or industry partners, is another way to gain access to both funding and resources. And I guess that's the crux of my role. One of the other things I don't do is I don't necessarily just focus on medicine. So you will find me wandering and engaging with people in business. You will find me engaging with people in arts and in science and engineering. I really don't, it doesn't matter to me where my contacts and networks go into or who I help, providing it goes into the university somewhere. So I guess that's a broad sort of introduction to myself, and there's a few other bits and pieces we'll work through as we go through. So my day-to-day role is I think some of you may or may not have been in a talk recently with Dr. Goriana Mitek from the Office of Commercialisation. So some of my history is in commercialisation, so I have done her role previously, and what I do now is really, I guess, an extension of that. One of the key things that Goriana mentioned in her talk was communications and engagement with researchers, engagement with investors, engagement with companies. Lots of talking, lots of engagement. And this is how I've ended up in this role, because I saw that through my technology transfer activities that I was doing, a lot of my activities were involved in communications, networking, and engagement. And I've transitioned into more of that role and less on the commercialization side. Having said that, I still do commercialization activities and help out Goriana and her team. So what do I do on a daily basis? It really varies, but here's a short list of things which really mean attending meetings, and there's a lot of them. It ranges from sort of short meetings, technical meetings, to long and quite droll, often, meetings talking about activities and policies and changes to procedures and things. But there are a lot of those, and partially that's related to making sure you have a network of people that you can keep in contact with. So one of the frustrating things about attending meetings is it doesn't actually result in any work. So you still have to do work after the meetings and before those meetings. So it's just an interesting nature of meetings themselves aren't productive. It's the things that happen outside of them. I also write a lot. I spend a lot of time writing agreements, whether they're legal agreements, they're grant agreements, memorandums of understanding. Basically, these are ways in which to engage with organisations and people in a contractual manner. And it sets out the terms of, what those engagements look like, and they will invariably involve considerable legal documentation and negotiation. One of the components of preparing those is to listen. And throughout your PhD, you're taught how to pitch. It's one of those key components, how can I give my 3-minute pitch, the 3-minute thesis competition? How can I elevate a pitch? What I do, sell myself. We're running I'm mentoring, I do a lot of mentoring as well, but on the side, we're running this ECR Engage program at the moment, which is an industry engagement program for early career researchers within the university. And it started off in medicine and has now expanded to include science and engineering, business and arts. But one of the very first things that they get taught in that program is how to listen. It happens to be a key component of my role. Listening to people and learning how to adapt your messaging based on what you have heard, as opposed to simply pitching what you are good at. And you will find if you hone that skill, it will be useful regardless of what you do in your career. It could be useful for a job interview. Listening to the feedback you get as you're going along and adapting your story to properly address the question rather than just reciting something that you have heard or have practiced previously. It's the same when you're engaging with any industry partner. You may go in with one particular message or one particular story. You have to adapt it on the fly, and you do that through listening. I'd spend a lot of time scanning the market and scanning for opportunities. And the reason is information and opportunities arise from all sorts of corners. And so I do spend quite a bit of my time just listening to what's going on, talking to lots of people without a specific objective in mind, just allow people to elaborate on what they have and what they do, with the aim of actually gathering information, gathering knowledge. And at some point in time, that information will become useful. You will have a need to combine pieces of information that you have heard over time and actually apply them to capture a particular opportunity as it arises. That may involve anything from technical literature reviews, so sitting in on technical presentations, to maybe more market-related information, what's happening, what's trending in the market, you know, what's happening with COVID at the moment and what opportunities have arisen as a result of COVID, for instance. That's changed a lot of opportunities. It's closed down a lot of others as well, but it's opened up a whole range of other potential things that we can explore as a university, in teaching or in research. I spend a lot of time identifying those opportunities, and those come through grants and, as I mentioned earlier, through synergistic opportunities. So whilst we're scanning for lots of different things, the key is being able to, and the last point on the page here is combining those things, combining these opportunities as they arise. And so 6 months ago, 12 months ago, I might have had a random discussion with someone about a particular technology. And yesterday I might have met with someone who had a particular research need. And by being able to combine these things together, keep engaging with those people over an extended period of time, you develop a rapport. It allows you to drop in and meet with them virtually or in person and put ideas before them. So those I'll give a quick example, social robotics. So I've had an interest in it for a while in robotics and automation, and I've spoken to lots of people about that. AI, machine learning, lots of things happening in those spaces. I've been keeping an ear out for what's happening in those spaces. In terms of one of the areas the medicine's interested in is aged care, and dementia and issues around mental health. So there's a lot of work happening in those. We have partners in aged care facilities. And then along comes COVID. And we just appointed somebody who's working in psychology as well, who happens to have an interest in social robotics in particular. And I've explored other companies that produce robots of different types. But COVID comes along and all of a sudden you have a whole aged care population who you're not allowed to visit. So how do you combine all of these various pieces of information to capture an opportunity? And then there's a funding opportunity that arises which says, we're looking at aged care, opportunities to address social isolation in aged care. Very quickly you pull together, combining all the bits and pieces we've gathered over time to say, I know somebody who's I've got a researcher that's interested in social robotics. I know robotics companies. I've worked with aged care partners. We've got a communications partner in Optus. Let's bring all these people together and see if we can't work together. And that's exactly what we did. Now, we didn't get the grant, but we still have all those partners together, and we're interested in exploring the next grant, which is coming out in the very near future. That particular opportunity has been sort of developing over 12 months or more, maybe a bit longer, 18 months. Certainly our partnership with the aged care provider has been in place for probably 2 years, nearly 3. The partnership the university has with Optus has been in place for at least 2, maybe 3 years. So these things take time to develop. And that's one of the catches with my role is you can't say I can't force things. I can force things, but they're not generally successful and they're not long lasting. So there are opportunities to bring different things together. And obviously as part of it at the end, maybe they should have been in a slightly different order, but pitching. So I have to pitch these opportunities at some point. I have to prepare a proposal, prepare a presentation. I have to pitch those ideas to various partners. So I would go to the researcher and say, I've got some companies interested that might be able to do this. What do you think? Do you think that's an opportunity? Here's a grant we've spotted that could be of use. I go to the companies and I go, I've got a researcher that's great. I've got some money. You don't have to put all the money in. Let's pull something together and put a proposal in. And they kind of hum and ha and yes and no. And, you know, you can talk people into doing lots of things. But generally you want them to buy into something of their own volition. You want them to see the opportunity themselves and the benefit that it's going to bring. And so there is an art in pitching and presenting this information, and certainly not in just pushing ideas forward onto them. They have to take some ownership of those ideas themselves. I did see a few questions come up. If there was any that I can address now that you may have seen come in.
Yes, we can field them now. Trent has a question around percentage of PhD graduates that proceed to research careers. That is difficult to maybe tell you in terms of numbers. But I suppose maybe we can come back to that, Trent, if that's okay. But I do see a question here from Elizabeth about, for yourself, Brenton, about taking short courses and the MBA. Have you found the skills gained in these courses useful in your career or influential in your career pathway?
Thanks, Elizabeth. Yes, the MBA I did, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later, but the MBA I did is to change careers. So I finished a PhD, and I'll expand a bit more about it, but effectively I ended up being bored doing research. The day-to-day of research was just repetitive with small incremental changes, and the prospects based on short-term employment opportunities and grants, the soft money that comes with a PhD and postdoctoral fellows positions, wasn't that attractive. And I could see this continuing. I'd had applied for lots of different funding, and I'd seen during my PhD, which was all externally funded, the need to repeatedly apply and justify your existence to get the grant, to get the next grant. And so when one grant ended, you had to start again and redo this. And I could see this happening for quite a few years. And so my intention was to skip all of that and go straight to potentially providing a source of funding. So my intention originally in doing an MBA was to be the source of funding for research. And I tried to get a few different jobs at different times, unsuccessfully with a PhD because I was pigeonholed as being very technically minded and very narrowly focused. And it was very difficult to convince people otherwise that, you know, maybe I could do other things. And for some jobs, I sort of put lower in my ranking my PhD. I didn't promote that at all. I never hid the fact that it was there, but I certainly didn't promote it. And at some point, I made a commitment. I just said, look, I have to retrain. I wasn't getting any success in reapplying for other jobs in different pathways. So I took an MBA as a means to retrain. I did look at some other short courses. The short courses I was thinking of here was whilst I was writing my PhD up, I did a photography course just for something different to give me other interests to do. But the MBA was really the catalyst for my career change. And I'll talk about that a little bit later as we go through the talk. But thank you for the question. I hope it answered at least that initial part of the question. Just drop those out. So I can just continue on. So these are some of the questions that Catherine provided through to me in terms of rewards and challenges of this particular role that I have now. Certainly there are many challenges, and I think you work in an organisation, there is no such thing as a perfect role. It doesn't matter what job you will have, ever. I think there will always be challenges, and they will differ for different roles. So if you think you're going to find a perfect job somewhere, I hate to disappoint you, but you're badly mistaken. The job is what you make it. And you can change a really ordinary job, which I have had before, into something which you make your own. And for one of my roles, I walked into the job and I was asked to do one thing, and it was impossible to actually do that thing until they completely restructured their entire business and approach to the way they were doing their work. And so my first 6 months was spent really restructuring that organisation to get it back to a stage where we could actually achieve the commercial objectives they wanted to do. But in terms of my role, even here, you know, working with any large organisation, there is organisational inertia. It is difficult to get large organisations to do things and to change a position or to actively engage in a process. And that can be very frustrating. You know, it might just be it's slow in progressing a legal agreement that you need done. It has to go through certain processes and systems within the university to be executed. So a legal agreement has to be filed and logged. People in research services have to see it. People in the legal office of general counsel have to review those agreements. Documentation has to be logged. Information has to be logged about that deal, who was involved, why is it there, what are the outputs, how is it going to be recorded? And these things just take time. And it frustrates me, and I have no doubt it frustrates our industry partners as well. But it's one of those challenges of dealing with it. And so it is about managing expectations of the industry partner so that you don't overpromise and underdeliver for the whole project. I think that would be the worst thing you can do from an industry partner perspective. There is a perception in the world that universities are difficult to deal with and unresponsive, and that's partially related to that organisational inertia. And sometimes it's related to the skill of the people which they're dealing with. So like any organisation, everybody is not exceptionally brilliant at their job and all aspects of their job. Some are good at certain parts and others are really bad. And depending on who an organisation deals with within, you know, a university, they can result in a very poor perception. And then when they finally come to talk to you, they go, last time I spoke with you guys, nothing happened and nothing worked, and I'm not very happy with the way this works, and I'm unlikely to do any work with you. And so before you can even start to talk about a deal, you've got to fix their perception. And again, that takes time sometimes. We've already spoken about the speed of university and its processes, and often there's a lot of politics and personal agendas to deal with, and that's probably no different to any other organisation. It's just a part of large organisations and often small organisations. But that's only one side. On the other side, there are a lot of rewards that arise from, you know, doing the role that I'm doing. I have enormous freedom and ability to create anything and follow my own curiosity in my role. So yes, there are certain things I have to do because I'm asked to do them, but I'm also given enormous freedom to explore an opportunity like the social robotics project. Nobody told me to do that or asked me to do it. It was a case of just exploring interests that I might have, as well as things or opportunities or capabilities that the organisation might have, and opportunities that present to grab hold of them and actually do something interesting. The scale of the organisation is also beneficial. It does help to have a big name behind you with big capability. And once the interests are aligned, a large organisation can actually be a powerful force to help you do your job. Particularly when problems arise and you're not left as an individual to fight those battles, and you have the support of an organisation, it really helps. Being at the cutting edge of technology and innovation, that's always of interest. Well, it's of interest to me with a technical background, but it's of interest to lots of people, you know, to find out what's coming over the horizon ahead of everybody else and being able to have a role in actually implementing those things. That's exciting. Being aware of what's coming along. And so, you know, again, it's a personal interest, but I think you're not alone in actually being able to convey broad interest in technology and innovation. I think it's an exciting area. Another key thing about being involved with universities is there's often open and creative discussion and debate. And that is not always the way in all organisations. I have delivered furniture before. The conversations that you have in a truck delivering furniture are not very open or creative. They may be shallow and crude, but they are certainly not really mentally stimulating for anyone that's sort of been through a university system. And one other aspect that I've enjoyed is the ability to travel. Now that's curtailed somewhat at the moment, but the actual flights and hotels and all the rest are painful, and I don't particularly enjoy that component. But the opportunity to meet people in different countries and different organisations with different perspectives is actually really good. And in one of my previous roles, I travelled around the world twice, sometimes 3 times a year. It was easier to travel around the world than just to go to Europe and come back again, so you might as well just keep going. But I had the opportunity to travel extensively throughout Europe, the US, to a lesser degree throughout Asia. And it's enormously rewarding to be able to meet people from various countries and create connections in those countries. It's just, you get experiences that you don't otherwise get if you were just residing here in the country. It does become a little bit tiresome having to travel regularly, and only those that travel regularly will appreciate that. So it all seems glamorous, but it's not, and it's become worse with time as security issues and screening through airports and everything else has increased. Anyway, there's some of the rewards and challenges of the role that I currently have. Who do I work with and who do I serve? I work for many people, so I'm in a service role effectively. I don't work necessarily for my own projects. My work helps other academics, researchers, and other people, high degree researchers, students, to engage with and work with companies and other organisations. I open doors for them so that they can get jobs, so that they can get funding, or they can get access to data or information, tools, or other resources. And as a result, I do work with companies, company directors, sales people, but government as well. And my role is really to serve, as I mentioned earlier, the university, not just a faculty. I don't work just for the Faculty of Medicine, I work for the university. It's the university that pays my salary, not the faculty per se. And I don't care who benefits, as I said before, but I think some of the most interesting work happens when you do cross-disciplinary research. And so I don't mind working with engineers or working in arts. I think arts is a really interesting area, particularly when you combine it with a hard science of some type. I think there's lots of interesting insights and opportunities that arise from those interesting combinations of discipline. I've also looked after of our partners' interests. So it's not all one-sided. It's not all about the university. You have to consider the fact that the benefits that arise from a collaboration or a partnership are shared. It is not all about me or all about the university. Something has to be given to be given back, I guess. It's a two-way street. And I guess as part of that role, I position myself, and I think everybody else should position themselves as a trusted advisor. And that means sometimes you turn things down. It's about being honest, and it builds currency in the relationship. So if I can't offer a particular expertise in an area, and I know that that exists at UTS or at University of New South Wales or at another institution overseas, as a trusted advisor to a partner, I would say Macquarie can't offer you what you want, but you should go and speak to this person, and I'm more than happy to make that introduction. And I've done that on a number of occasions. What that does is we might not win that initial business, but what we've done is we've won their trust and their long-term commitment to Macquarie as an organisation, or to me. They'll come and ask me. They can trust me to give them the right advice. And at the end of the day, that wins more business than overselling an organisation and then under-delivering, which is what ends up happening. So that sort of summarises who I work for. And I guess part of all of these things ties back into impact and the translation of research outcomes into real world usage. And increasingly, all funding activities at universities are going to become increasingly dependent on the impact they generate. And unless your research generates impact, and that can be through research publications, but that's only part of the story. There are other aspects. It's still an important part. So research publications, believe it or not, are exceedingly important to industry, particularly when they're independent. So it's also important to maintain your independence when publishing. Disclose the fact you've got funding from certain sources, but don't just take money to publish and do things for people. I think a level of independence and saying, look, I can't take the money to do that. I'm happy to take your money and do the research, but you cannot veto my research or the findings. And so quite often companies want to have a final editorial say on your publication because they funded it. I'd push back on that every time. It doesn't serve you and it doesn't serve the company well either. I think there is value in publication. Impartial, independent publications are of value to those organisations, and I think you can still sell that. The translation of research into commercial use is one of those impact stories, and that's the technology transfer piece that Goriana was speaking about in the previous talk. The ability to align with other organisations on particular initiatives and projects. So companies come up with different things they want to do, and if you can tap into their projects or activities or interests that are already ongoing, you kind of get a carry. You get carried along with that. You'll be able to tap into the marketing power of those organisations. You'll be able to tap into the brand that's attached to some of those organisations as well and include it in your work. So you might not get a lot of money directly out of those, but there might be some other benefits which are quite valuable. And it goes into that translation. How is my research applicable to industry and to the real world? Press releases, videos, conference presentations, TV interviews, social media, Twitter, Facebook, and all of those, they're important. And so it's important to publish your research, not just through the publication where you have it, but through other mechanisms. And the university is keen to get good news stories and publish those. But increasingly, you can do that yourself through a laboratory Facebook page or a LinkedIn page or your own personal LinkedIn page, and making those connections, particularly if you want to engage with industry and demonstrate impact. So LinkedIn is a good one, and I would encourage everyone to have a profile on LinkedIn. It's not Facebook, so it's not about putting family photos up and what you did on the weekend. It is a professional business website, and if you start publishing more social media type things for Facebook or Twitter, then you may get a bit of flack from the community basically saying, this is not Facebook, don't clutter it up, and this is a professional business site. But you can also get value out of presentations, conference presentations, and making sure that you follow up. And I think that's one of the things. People attend lots of conferences and do lots of things, but they don't follow up those contacts. And it doesn't have to be extensive. It's just an acknowledgement of, commentary that somebody did or a business card that somebody exchanged with you. It's about building a network. And the bigger that network, the more likelihood you are to be able to tap into it at some point in the future, find those connections that are of value to you, And I would suggest that you might think, oh, it's too early in my career to put a LinkedIn page up. I mentor students all the time, and one of the first things we do is we get them a LinkedIn page and I get them a business card. That business card can say student. It doesn't matter, or higher degree student. What it is, it's a tool to exchange and initiate a conversation with someone. It's a way of getting their business card. And on the back of that card, you can say, you know, completing PhD in a certain time, we'll be looking for work in these areas afterwards. And so it serves multiple purposes. But the key thing is to follow up. And, you know, those follow-ups lead to different things and unexpected opportunities. And through those networking platforms, one contact can lead to many others, and a lot of serendipitous inquiries happen through those types of platforms.
Can I just ask you something? There's a question I was asked on the quietie, just talking about what you were saying about the need to build a network in your role. The question was about, are there any particular networking techniques that you use to make contacts and to maintain those contacts? Because that's the hard part, isn't it? Maintaining, particularly when they're not immediately relevant, like there's no specific grant opportunity currently being worked on. And is LinkedIn the channel, or are there other suggestions that you might have? And you have been talking about LinkedIn.
So LinkedIn is quite good, but building the network is very valuable, and there are lots of ways to do it. I guess the best way to build a strong and ongoing network is to approach everyone as though you were just having a friendly discussion. You shouldn't go into every discussion with an objective, which is, I'm here to promote myself and get funding. I think you end up with a lot of chance discussions and interesting discussions which happen just by continuing to explore that individual and what they do. So for instance, I bumped into someone who works in tax. Now, I don't know if we've got anybody from business here or from finance, but tax isn't the most interesting of topics. But this individual not only did tax, but they had huge networks and had done lots of different roles for lots of other companies. But I wouldn't have known that unless I actually followed up, and I ended up having a coffee with them afterwards, just to sort of say, well, let's follow up and have a meeting after our initial discussion. We'd found a couple of interesting points of interest to us, but we didn't know if there was actually anything of interest. And in fact, I still haven't done anything formal with them. And I've probably known them probably the last 12 months or more. And they were a contact of somebody else who I bumped into. They were an accountant or a taxation specialist. And it didn't seem like there were many connections. But rather than focusing on what I might get out of it, it was just a case of, well, what else do you do? You know, who have you met? What type of other activities have you had an interest in? What types of companies have you worked with before? And we sort of explored all sorts of different opportunities. And it turns out they're quite passionate in, I can't remember what it was now. It escapes me what it was. But the idea is they have different areas of interest. And I think it doesn't matter who it is. You could be sitting next to somebody on a bus and strike up a conversation that serendipitously is the most valuable connection you have ever made. And it's just about engaging with people, listening to what they say, and having a conversation. And you just don't know where those things will end up. In terms of building the network, LinkedIn is good because business cards go out of date within 6 months, generally speaking. People change roles, change companies, their phone number changes, any number of reasons. Business cards go out of date, so they have a very short life. LinkedIn is the permanent connection to that person, so they will change roles. Why start early? Because people who you are working with now will eventually be CEOs and directors of companies, and they will grow their career in parallel to you. Now, it will head off in different tangents, just like mine has or yours will. But at some point, they will be in a position of power and influence that you might need to tap into or might have an availability. And these things do take time, but you know, the more people you have in those networks, the better off you are to capitalize on those networks in the future. I hope that's answered the question, Sally, and whoever else was interested in that.
Yeah, I think so.
The key thing is it all takes time, and you know, you can't rush these things. They will grow over time, but if, you know, I'm happy to sit for 18 to 20 months or more, 2 years or more, just waiting and building the relationship. So we built a relationship with Fujitsu across the road from the hospital. I don't think anybody had walked across the road. I wandered over there, started talking to some people, built a connection, have done a memorandum of understanding with them. They've invested $1 million in a research project. They've established the digital transformation hub in computer science, which is their co-creation space. And they continue to engage with students and the university in an ongoing and productive manner. I started the engagement with them thinking it's a 5-year program to get to that type of level of engagement. It took 2 years. Actually, it probably took a bit less than that, but they just happened to be receptive to engaging with the university and finding partnerships that serve their needs. But I would still expect that will go on for 10 years or more, that particular partnership. And it's just an ongoing process. And the more you get to know someone, the more you're likely to do with them and the easier it becomes. And I guess the other challenge is you need to continually adapt any story you have about an opportunity to a changing university messaging. And the university doesn't change its messaging frequently, so it's not such an issue. But you need to continuously adapt. So it's not one message is it for the next 10 years. It is, let's adapt and grow that messaging on a continual basis and continue to align the university's interests with those of other organisations, or potentially try to influence the university's interest with those of some of the companies. But again, these things take time. You can do them quickly, but it's not what I would suggest an ideal mechanism, because they will do it once, but they won't do it again. So a couple of points on the importance of a PhD, and it's not just about, you know, the technical expertise you gain and the knowledge you gain on a particular domain. It's about the things that you're able to do as a result of having done a PhD. The ability to think, the ability to write, to pitch. Interestingly, it didn't necessarily teach me to listen. That was something I had to learn after that again. But there are a lot of features here, and I've got some other additional information. Let me just switch my screen over. See if I can't find another screen here. Just pop out and I will load up a different screen. If I can find it. Can't see what I'm looking at. What I want to do is use that one.
Just while you're looking for that, Brenton, I'm not sure, Sally, if you can address Trent's earlier question about the numbers of people in research careers, or maybe we'll come back to that now that we have.
I don't know the exact answer to that, but look, I think there is a large percentage of people that drop out of doing research careers and change, and it could be in the order of 50% or more of people who've done a PhD don't necessarily continue to do a PhD. I haven't got the exact numbers, so that's just a rough guess, and it could actually be higher than that. Part of it is that, you know, postdoctoral positions are increasingly competitive, and, you know, people went into research careers years ago with the objective of doing a postdoc, doing another postdoc, lectureship, senior lecturer, associate professor, but that career path is very disjointed now. It's still possible, but it can be challenging. And given the current environment at the moment, it's going to be increasingly hard to get a pure academic career. Not impossible for those that really want it, but it could be a challenge. So I'm going to allow this, we'll share this around later, but these are just some bits and pieces that I have collated over time around reasons why, you know, PhDs are valuable. And there are different ways: expert innovators, masters of conflict resolution, doctors of learning. So big companies want to hire PhDs because they're overqualified, too independent. So, you know, there's stories here about people who've had challenges in getting roles. If I go through, you know, 7 career advantages of PhDs have outside of academia. And so they know how to find answers. They don't fear failure. They know how to deal with negative bosses. I don't know if anyone's had a negative supervisor or not, but I believe they're reasonably common. They're uncomfortable with uncertainty. I think that's one of the key things. In a changing environment, it's probably a good thing. We don't just regurgitate information, they create it. I quite like that. Thrive on competition and collaboration. So these are just, and they're qualified for any industry position. I think this is something that, you know, I guess is undersold. You get pigeonholed as being, you know, an expert in a narrow field, but I think in reality, a PhD trains you to be able to apply for almost any job. So I will get this circulated, and people who want that, it can go up on the website. It's just a collation of documents that I have accumulated over time.
Great, thank you, Brenton. Yeah, I'm familiar with Cheeky Scientist. They have, he has great articles out all the time. But thank you for that. That was amazing. A few things that stuck out for me there, especially was at the start when you mentioned about, I suppose, the emphasis of pitching. And, you know, and that's certainly something we're, you know, covering a lot. Sally and I have been in discussions about, you know, an ideal enterprising courses, you know, and pitching is really important, but listening is really overlooked. So I'm glad you raised that. You know, it's a real skill to be able to listen, paraphrase back, you know, make sure you're actively listening. So really, really cool to hear that. Also networking and being in a large organization. I suppose the opportunity we have, you know, being at Macquarie right now is that you have so many people you can tap into and using your network. But they were the 2 things that stood out for me, and thank you for covering so much in that. We have a few more minutes for a bit more Q&A. We didn't start till just about 5 past, so we have about 10 more minutes if everybody wants to stick with us until then. Sally, did you want to feed in there?
Well, I guess the thing is, you know, additionally, you know, there is research positions, academic positions within universities, and then the positions in other sectors. And of course, you know, what we're focusing on here and highlighting and showcasing is people like Goriana and Brenton and the others we hope to get, are that there are some very rich roles within universities which offer potentially more security, but that is a bit of a myth in any work these days, and more so perhaps where we are now. So yeah, that's been a really interesting insight, and it taps into the work that Goriana talks about that she does, and you've also done as well, Brenton. So I think that hopefully also opens up people's minds to that there are really interesting roles within university. Did you want to ask something, Elizabeth? No, just thought you might have put your video on to ask something, but that's fine. Any other questions anyone has?
We did have a few in our bank as well, while people maybe are thinking about anything else they want to add. We had a few questions that Brenton also has prepared, but if they do spark other things, I do like that current slide you have up there, no such thing as a straight line career. Very, very
well, I'll quickly elaborate on this one because it kind of explains, you know, how I've got to where I've got to. And so, you know, a PhD, you know, you could take this line as my career path trajectory or salary, whichever way you like to take it. So it started off, you know, I was on a postdoc path potentially of going along here, decided I didn't particularly want to do that. So I decided to retrain at great expense to myself. The key thing, I guess, was as I changed careers successfully out of that, it was actually financially a good move. One of the key reasons why I changed careers was I was bored. You've got to be careful what you wish for, because I haven't been bored since. And certainly Goriana's talk from last week indicated the expanse of things that tech transfer involves. And without a doubt, if you can do tech transfer, you can do any job. Interestingly, there's always a change in a career. And so I left tech transfer, went overseas briefly, and ran out of money and decided I'd better come back. And I quickly jumped into a tech transfer role again. They were kind enough to pay me, but at a lower level. So I ended up moving over and changing roles and went to a CRC position where I was the head of IP and commercialization for a CRC. But like all CRCs, they come to an end. And so again, I went and worked for myself for a little while, but pretty well ran out of money again. Had to go back into tech transfer as a role. They were kind enough to pay me about the same as I had several years before, but still not as high as I'd had many, many years ago. I ended up transitioning within the organisation to do partnerships. So one of the key roles that Goriana had said about tech transfer, and certainly central for me, is the ability to communicate with and network with people. And that was how I sort of made this transition to a partnership role rather than a tech transfer role or a commercial role. And eventually to where I'm at now. But the question is, based on my history, or have I? So I think, you know, there are several careers in this path already that I've had. So don't ever think that the job you get is your last job, because that's not the case. There is always something else. And, you know, there are dips and things in your career that change over time, and it is not always predictable, but it's certainly, there's no direct path from a PhD through to, you know, the type of position I've got now. You can't plan these things. They're opportunistic and you grab them as they come through. So that was where I got to. Feel free, if anyone would like to contact me there for any other questions beyond this. I'm more than happy to answer questions as well.
Brilliant. Thanks so much. That was awesome. You've covered quite a bit there, and that last slide was really good in terms of showing where, you know, little ups and downs maybe in, you know, where you are now. In terms of your role actually across the university, Brenton, are you the only person who holds that particular type of role? I'm not familiar with anybody in arts who holds a similar type role.
It's an interesting role. I think it was originally a associate dean type role historically, and I think that's how most faculties run it. So there'll be an associate dean of engagement of some sort. There is also the corporate engagement office, which does very specifically around company engagements with the university. I don't work for them. I work in the faculty in an equivalent to that ADR type role or associate dean type role, but as a professional staff member. And I think it's, from all accounts, it's worked quite well for them. Partially, I guess, because I have a technical so the technical background, I think, helps. as well as a whole range of, or a broad range of professional experiences. So, the ability to draft agreements, to negotiate with people, understand the technical issues that are there, understand those nuances of the industry speak versus the technical speak that comes in. And so in the CRC role, I spent a lot of time engaging with industry partners in the CRC and actually bringing them on board, but I also acted as a translator. Some of those industry partners don't have the technical know-how. They're happy to invest in it and they want the outcomes, but they don't understand the detail of what they're getting. And so you have to interpret that for them and how they would apply that technical knowledge into something which is commercial. And so that's kind of the role I have even now. Industry has a need. I can find a technical person, but the technical person can't talk directly to the industry person. So I'm sort of like the translation machine in the middle.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and I suppose, as you said, an associate dean role, typically you have to have a PhD, you have to be an academic, and you're able to straddle that, in a director role, but also having a PhD is a great, I suppose, it's very sympathetic to that particular role in a university. So we just have a few more minutes. If anybody else has any more questions, we did have a few more here. I'm not sure we'll have time to cover much more today, but really are very grateful and delighted to have you today, Brenton. Thank you so much for all you've put into that presentation. I think we've gotten an absolute ton out of it. It's been really awesome to have you here today. If there's no more further questions, I think we might wrap up there. Sally, do you want to come in there?
No, I also want to say thank you, Brenton. We hope we have other people that are so keen as, yourself and Gloriana, were so willing to take this up after we asked you to do that. And we have a long list. I have got a bit of a report of who's got a PhD working in a professional role. And so anyone that does know anyone, please let us know to see if anyone's interested. Because I think it really is a sort of untapped area of career potential for PhDs, because many of, I don't have a PhD, but I've worked in higher ed for such a long time, and all the frustrations Brenton talked about, I can relate to, but I'm prepared to deal with the, inertia sometimes that you have because of all those other things you mentioned. And it's such an inspiring place to work. And I think many people want to stay in that inspiring environment, but they may not want to, try and they might get bored of research, as you did, Brenton. I've talked to other people in that situation, or they're just tired of that greater insecurity, precarious nature of employment that you often are faced with, or the expectations. It's such a big job now to be an academic with a service role, the research and the teaching. There's so much in it that it can actually really take over your life. So there's a whole range of reasons why people might want to stay in higher ed, but have a really interesting role. And yours is one, Graham's another. So, I think this is a really valuable, hopefully, series of webinars we'll have. And we just really are very grateful to you.
I don't think, I would never suggest that people don't pursue an academic career if that's what they're interested in. I think there is enormous value in it. And yes, the roles have changed and grown and it has become very challenging, but the career options are actually quite diverse. When I've mentored other students, they've been quite down, I guess, about their prospects for employment and what they could do. They take a very narrow view of what their career opportunities look like, but marketing, sales, business development, commercialization, technical writers, investors, R&D, tax specialists, consultants. I've just got a whole list here of things: product development, patent attorney, entrepreneur, investor, science communicator. There are so many roles which flow off of from having had a PhD. You should never limit yourself to just saying all I can do is a postdoc in the field in which I work. I would never think broadly, the world is your oyster, really. You can do whatever. Don't let people pigeonhole you. That would be the last thing. So,
thanks, Brenton. Yeah, I think that's a good place to finish on, that positive note. Thanks again, and thanks for everybody for joining us today.
Really
Look forward to
appreciate
seeing you in the next webinar. Thanks, Sally.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Catherine. Thanks, Brenton. Thank you all for coming.